Before we begin off the record, I need to share something important. When federal funding was cut, WKAR lost $1.6 million. Thanks to cost-saving measures and community support, we've closed much of that gap. But we still face a $500,000 shortfall, and we can't finish the job without you. Your financial support keeps programs like Off the Record freely available to everyone in Mid-Michigan. How can you help? Become a sustaining donor today. Already a sustainer? Please consider increasing your monthly contribution. Visit wkar.org/OTR to donate, or click the link in the description. Now, Off the Record.
Thanks for tuning in. The OTR guest this week is the campaign manager of a petition drive to bring so-called ranked voting to Michigan. His name, Joe Spalding. Our lead story, the governor gives a speech on the budget. What did she do and why did she do it? Around the table, Rick Pluta, Jordan Hermany, and Simon Schuster. Sit in with us as we get the inside out. Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Welcome to Studio C, another edition of Off the Record. The governor gave a speech this week. What was the hidden agenda, if she had one? Let's take a look. Governor Gretchen Whitmer was upbeat as she urged the legislature to finish the new state budget in time to avert a government shutdown on October 1.
We can still do this on time.
But it was a more somber governor who reflected on the state's lousy economy.
This is a man-made storm of uncertainty that hits Michigan hard.
The governor did not attack by name President Trump for his tariff policies, but pledged to work to change them, as the auto sector is racking up billions of dollars in lost revenue. But it was after her speech when the Senate Democratic leader got into the act and made some news. She accused the House Republicans of coming close to making budget agreements and then, allegedly, pulling back.
We make progress, and then things do not result in actual actions that would get us to the point where we have a budget that we can pass.
Ms. Brink says it's like Lucy pulling that football away from Charlie Brown.
There are promising conversations, and when it comes time to actually put those agreements down and make them firm, those commitments do not happen.
Notice she does not mention House Republican Speaker Matt Hall by name, but he is the only Republican in the room negotiating. For his part, Mr. Speaker says this about all this. Are you negotiating in good faith?
Yes.
As part of your tough negotiating stance, coming up to the table close to a deal and then backing off, are you doing that, sir?
No. Both sides are negotiating tough, but progress is continuing to be made.
As to how this all works out, stay tuned, as they say. Yeah, okay, so why did the governor do this speech?
Well, I think that we have, next week is one last full week that we have together as a legislature before the government potentially shuts down on October 1. I mean, this is crunch time. If ever there were a moment to say, hey, everybody, we need to get in the room, we need to get serious about this, and we need to get some kind of budget done, it's now. I mean, frankly, it was a couple weeks ago, because everybody who I've spoken with that's been around in these past government shutdowns say it's not as if you can just flick a switch and say that, hey, we have a budget done, we're going to avert the government shutdown. It takes time. Now, I don't doubt that that's being undertaken in the background, that the necessary steps are being taken to pull together a budget. But at the same time, when you see stuff like that, it really does make you wonder if we're barreling towards October 1st, what's on the other side of that shutdown for us?
Yeah, I think that also, if we're not already in the blame game phase of this budgetary impasse, I think we're on the cusp of it. And Governor Whitmer was just in Asia for quite a few days on an investment mission. And so I think also, there's going to be those conversations where, as the leader of the state, as the head of the Democratic Party in Michigan, was she utilizing the bully pulpit enough? And so this is an opportunity for her to sort of take Republican leaders to task, remind voters that, there is a caucus in the Senate, there's a Democratic control there, and that, they're still on somewhat of a unified front.
Yeah, showing up and reminding the Democrats that she's a Democrat after getting all of this attention for talking about being a partner with House Speaker Matt Hall, showing up in the White House to meet with Donald Trump, that they were looking for a little public reminder that there is a Team D working in the Capitol on the budget.
Other governors have gone into the caucus personally to talk to people when there's a problem. I think that would have gotten the job done more, not to tell the governor how to do her job.
And yet there you are. You just did.
No, I wasn't. I said what other governors are doing. If you notice clearly, I said, Governor, you shouldn't have done this. Okay, I did not say that, Rick, and I accept your apology. Okay? Anyhow, look, she's got a problem with the Senate Democrats, does she not?
I would say to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, she's laid out budgetary priorities, including getting a roads deal done. The Senate Democrats haven't put forward a roads plan, which would certainly put them on the record saying, here's a policy proposal we want to put forward, even though the governor has provided one. And so, trying to provide that unified front does become a little bit more difficult, especially with the rhetoric coming from the House Speaker saying that, never mind Senate Democrats, the governor and I can get a deal done. That sort of undermines the strength of their negotiating position. And so that's why I think this speech also had some utility for her in sort of reminding people that, where her allegiances lie.
And to Simon's point, there are some interesting quiet developments going on. When was the last Matt Hall media roundtable?
It's been a minute.
It's been a couple of weeks. And so have we gotten into a quiet period where things are happening, that progress is being made, and the more incendiary rhetoric is getting quiet? Because, like you said, it's crunch time, and state employees are wondering why they have not been notified per their union agreements on layoffs. That's the administration's responsibility, and they haven't done that. There are just a lot of signals that maybe things are getting a little more serious and a little less publicly performative, with the exception of the governor giving a speech to say, here I am.
That's a bit of what I was speaking to a moment ago when I said I've spoken with folks who've been around in these past government shutdowns before, and when you're talking about needing to pull together on crunch time, I had someone tell me that basically once we get past the 15th of this month, which we have, it's pretty much certain that we're headed there because of the fact that it takes time to draft things, let alone to get on the same page at a negotiated budget. And you're thinking about the Senate Democrats and Whitmer, who they're relatively close, at least in terms of fiscal spending on what they're.
D's after their names.
That too, but in terms of fiscal spending, they're all over the $80 billion mark. Meanwhile, the House Republicans have proposed a much smaller budget. It would seem to be that they are the ones that have to do more of the coming to the table. Who knows whether that's happening, though? But, you saw Whitmer even earlier this week, and I won't say Whitmer specifically, but her department's now coming out and railing against these budgets, specifically the House Republicans ones, which had been notably absent ahead of, again, this crunch time, this everybody get in the room and let's figure out what we need to be doing.
I think so much of Governor Whitmer's political brand and also perhaps her political future is being staked on this idea that she's a bipartisan unifier, that she can sort of go above this fray and bring people together. But this was sort of, I think, a mark of a sea change, saying that I think the era of delicate diplomacy here, where you're not going to sort of take anybody to task and hope that you can bridge these divides, is as we get closer to this. And my understanding is, the governor's office, if you want to get this budget done, as Jordan said, with adequate review, you sort of need something done by mid-month, and that's come and gone. And so that era is over.
What about the NIF9 that Ms. Brinks brought up, that the speaker's coming up to the line and then backing off?
Well, hasn't that kind of been his style to date? And again, I think that gets back to that quiet period and trying to work through the details. My understanding is that even where the principals are not meeting or talking together, that the staff level, that there's a lot of proposals and papers being shared, or at least online being shared back and forth to try and get to the parameters of a deal. My big question is, in order to get to something on time, it's not just what's going to be in the agreement, but what's going to be left out of the agreement to be negotiated later, because there are so many urgent matters at hand.
The bigger question is, do they just simply do a continuation budget to buy some more time like they do in Washington? Why not?
I think part of the difficulty there is the sort of government shutdown prevention plan that House Republicans passed earlier this year that Senate Democrats were so vehemently against that sort of doing a continuation budget, a patch, sort of seems like an aspect of capitulation there.
Well, there is, because the whole point of the, quote unquote shutdown prevention plan was to create a super skinny budget that operated within the Republicans' negotiating interest. Right. And then you negotiate outward from there, which means that, for everything you get, there needs to be a concession. I mean, it would just be a ridiculous bargaining point for the Democrats to start from.
Mr. Vance, the vice president, why was he in Howell? Can somebody explain this, why the taxpayer money was spent on flying him into Howell?
Well, I mean, this is still a very competitive congressional district. And I think also he has a responsibility as the vice president to go out and sell the president's policy projects. But then again, when we went and saw this 20-minute address, he didn't really heavily discuss too much the actual one big beautiful bill. He sort of went to we're living in an era where our political discourse is so fractured. People's attention spans are so divided. He went on a potpourri of hot button topics and sort of touched a little bit of something for everybody, sending National Guard troops into Detroit, for example.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more to say than what Simon pretty much said. And then on top of that, doubling down on the, if Governor Whitmer asks, we're more than happy to send them to Detroit, despite the fact that we are seeing historic crime lows in Detroit, I believe the lowest in 60 years, nearly 60 years. You can't talk about turning down the rhetoric while also talking about bringing the National Guard when your police is working in your city.
And what's the point of showing up in Howell to talk about sending National Guard troops to Detroit? Because even if that wasn't the headline, that was a headline. And, if you're going to do that, then, maybe, you should have the chutzpah to show up in Detroit and do it.
And the governor's response was?
No.
Did she say no?
She said not necessary. They're not looking for it.
Well, even better than that, how about the mayor of Detroit, who sat in this chair and said, no thanks.
Right.
Okay, so whatever. All right, let's first of all, before we go on.
That's almost like a Mike Duggan campaign, in-kind campaign contribution.
I'm sure he'll get the bill for that too, right? Bruce Patterson, former state lawmaker,
yes.
Ricky, that we had the honor to cover, has passed.
Him, yeah. Yes.
He was a piece of work, wasn't he?
He was a large man, both in terms of his physical presence and his personality. He had a handlebar mustache. I mean, think sort of a William Howard Taft sort of look, and he was very proud of being a member of the legal profession. He was not afraid to get in your face, but he could also be a charmer.
I called him Cousin Brucey. Okay,
well, because of the DJ.
Yes, but of course he didn't. He's an opera fan. He didn't know who Cousin Brucey was, who was a disc jockey in New York. For those of you that didn't listen to radio in New York, anyway.
I grew up listening to him.
I called him Cousin Brucey, and he said, "Timmy, what does that mean?" So I explained it to him, and then he told me all about opera. So it was an even exchange. Our best to Phyllis, his wife. He was fun to cover. He truly was. All right, let's see what Joe Spalding's got to say about ranked voting. There you go. Mr. Spalding, welcome to Off the Record. So the obvious question is, in 25 words or less, explain ranked voting. Go.
Oh, wow.
That's two. No, that was one.
So it helps if you're adding, if you're thinking about adding, not thinking about adding ranking to voting, but actually thinking about adding voting to ranking, because ranking is something that folks do every day. So there's not a lot of difference in terms of difficulty when it comes to ranking candidates in an election. When it comes and ranking like maybe your 5 favorite movies, for instance. And so ranked choice voting itself.
We should probably quickly explain that the whole point of ranked choice voting is that you rank your choices, but then the bottom ones get dropped and the votes are reassigned to the candidates who are remaining.
Right. And I got tripped up a little bit by counting words, but when you're...
Let me put it this way. You weren't even close. Okay.
Yeah. So, no, the voters would rank their candidates in order of preference, 1, 2, 3. If their first candidate can't win, their vote still counts for their second choice. And the way that those would get tallied up is the tallies would come in on election night, and the candidate that has the fewest votes, they would not be eligible to win. And the people that selected them first, their votes would still count, but they would count for their second choice. And they would repeat this process until someone has more than 50% of the vote.
And so when you say they would repeat this process, that to me sounds like this goes far beyond Election Day, correct?
That's not really the case. We're finding that more than 70% of ranked choice voting elections, the results are found on the night of the election.
So if I'm a voter entering the ballot box and we have ranked choice voting in Michigan, there's 5 candidates on the ballot. I go 1 through 5. I don't have to come back and reassess my votes. I don't have to do anything extra as the voter.
No, and so it's also called instant runoff voting, and one of the really good ways to kind of understand how you can kind of condense that all into one ballot is the military overseas in states that do use runoff elections in the South. They do use ranked choice voting because it essentially has the voter telling how they would vote in any given runoff situation.
So what problems in the existing system would ranked choice voting solve?
This is a really important question.
Sort of slow and straight and across the plate. So.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. Right now, voters are actively punished when they're given more choices in an election. So having a third candidate run an election effectively means the winner only needs 34% of the vote to win. A fourth candidate means they only need 25%. And so that creates a specific type of accountability problem. But actually, we're finding that there's a bigger problem that we're kind of addressing with ranked choice voting that we're experiencing as a nation right now when it comes to the increase in political tension in aggressive rhetoric leading and spilling over into political violence. And one of the things about ranked choice voting that's super important to know is that it changes the incentive from a zero-sum negative campaign incentive towards an incentive towards building collaboration and building coalitions with other folks, meeting voters and talking to them about issues, because they have to build a 50% coalition in order to win at the end of the day.
So strategically, you don't want to trash the other candidates too much so that you can attract their supporters further on down the ballot.
That's exactly right. So if Rick, if you and I were voters in an election and Jordan and Simon here were running and Simon's my ride or die, you know that going into it, I'm never going to not vote for Simon first, but you really, really want me to rank Jordan second. The worst thing you could say is that Simon is a jerk if you want me to rank Jordan second.
Not that I would ever say that.
No one would ever say that.
So I don't know necessarily if the political science literature we've seen so far supports ranked choice voting producing more moderate candidates, but in the places that we've seen ranked choice voting in the U.S. in Maine and Alaska and New York, these are sort of political environments that are a little bit out there. They're a little bit unique. Last year, we had 5 different states have ranked choice voting on the ballot. All of them rejected the proposal. What's going to set this campaign apart?
So this is actually my second statewide campaign in Michigan. In my first statewide campaign, I ran strategy for Voters Not Politicians on their anti-gerrymandering campaign. That was a grassroots, ground-up effort that was started by volunteers, and they built up that coalition and built up that volunteer army and went out and got all the ink on paper with just volunteers. Now, I don't know if at Rank My Vote we're going to be able to get all of our signatures with just volunteers, but I do know where we came from, and Rank My Vote was started by 4 volunteers that worked with Voters Not Politicians.
Does this mean you're reverting to paid petition circulators?
We're not reverting to paid petition circulators right now, but we have all options on the table. We want to get this thing on the ballot.
How many names do you have?
How many names on our petition? Well, petition programs don't normally track that information live. We have
you had a briefing though earlier this week where you disclosed that number.
Yeah, so right now we know that the number is in a pretty wide range. It's between 70,000 and 150,000. That's based on the number of sheets that have gone out, come back, and requests for more going out. So,
and you're shooting for?
The raw signature count we're shooting for is over 600,000. We need to get over 446,000 to get on the ballot.
Does this mean you're not on target then?
So from a percentage standpoint, if we were supposed to be getting the same amount every month, then we wouldn't be able to meet that goal right now. But the organization is rapidly growing, and the rate of growth indicates that we are going to be able to get that target.
Was the problem in other states, was it a lack of organization?
I think it was more at the end of the day, these are propositions that got on the ballot, but if you get on the ballot and you don't have that grassroots authenticity, which money can't buy, it's a lot harder of a sell to voters. And the voters know the difference between an authentic grassroots movement and not. And so that's why I'm wanting to pair this to the.
Okay, but I guess the same
campaign.
question. Does that mean that in other states where this has failed, that there was not grassroots authenticity?
Well, I don't know about the specifics of every single one of the campaigns in terms of the grassroots authenticity, but I do know that a lot of them were funded the traditional way, where there is somebody that has a lot of cash that wants to get an issue passed through, and if they're the ones that start the campaign in a specific spot, even if they're authentically in state and they care, sometimes it's a lot harder. You really have to do the work on the ground and do grassroots work like Rank My Vote has done. We've been around since 2019, founded by volunteers, and we've been working at the municipal level until this year, getting ranked choice voting passed in different cities.
So while clearly part of your pitch here is an identity as a nonpartisan grassroots organization, I think we're seeing this increasingly being drawn into partisan fights. House Republicans have legislation that would ban ranked choice voting. There's an increasing level of conservative infrastructure out there in the country that talks about ranked choice voting as rigged choice voting, that it's socialistic, it's going to confuse voters. How can you avoid getting drawn into those partisan battles?
Well, that's another really good question. There's always, when you try to increase the voice and choice for voters, there's always pushback on the opposite side from folks that do not want to see those changes made. And really, ranked choice, something that we do not get challenged on by our opposition is the incentive switch from negativity towards collaboration building. And so folks that have spent their careers tearing people down and getting elected doing it, I understand why they don't like ranked choice voting and why they come at it so hard.
Is that why Republicans are against it?
You're going to have to ask the Republicans specifically that are against it.
Where did you get that idea?
Where did I get the idea that folks negatively campaign and get elected because I live in America?
Well, isn't that both parties doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is seen as a winning campaign tactic that consultants tell their clients to use. Then they know that when they say go negative hard, and we'll spend a lot of money on it, they know that they're going to lower voter turnout doing that. They just think they're going to lower it more for the other guy, which is the whole point of the incentive that we're trying to switch right now.
So do you have an outside sugar daddy or sugar mama who's putting the money in this thing?
I mean, no. So, why
did that draw that response?
Well, because we're a grassroots organization. We're funded by our volunteers who go out there and work really hard every day. It's a real hard grind. And if you go out there at any festival in Michigan, you're going to see our guys getting ink on paper. And they're volunteers doing that. And they're also, a lot of them are putting the money where their mouths are. They really believe in the change that we're offering, and they believe in the future of Michigan, where we can lower the temperature by changing that incentive over.
When we hear about Michigan and Michigan's elections, we constantly are told as a part of a security side that we have a very decentralized elections process. So how does ranked choice voting vibe, or how is Michigan potentially unique in that aspect?
So this is another really good question, because the approach that Rank My Vote took towards building our petition program and the policy itself was to take into consideration a lot of things that the election administrators have been talking about. Something that goes along with our proposal is that we would be moving the primary date back from August to June. That gives them the election administrators a little bit more of a breathing room. I think that a lot of even elected officials are kind of aware of that. Something else that the policy does is that we're focused on just the top of the ballot right now. So we're talking about the U.S. President, U.S. Senate, Governor, AG, Secretary of State, and then U.S. Congress. And because we're dealing with the top of the ballot, the changes that will be brought by the proposal are fairly uniform across the board. So, Michigan has this, every state has this issue. Michigan, it's pretty egregious, where as you go down the ballot, the districts don't overlap. So school districts don't overlap with county commission districts, don't overlap with state house districts. It's fairly bad, and some of the precincts in Michigan only have, there's some precincts that's the only precinct where that ballot is used. Unique ballots in precincts.
Let's look at the election, the primary election in the Republican primary for governor way back when Rick Snyder won with 34% of the vote. Would this have been, if it had been, is it possible Rick Snyder wouldn't have gotten the nomination?
So it's really, really difficult to tell how an election would have been decided if we used ranked choice voting without having actually used ranked choice voting there. The thing that we do know is that it does create a level playing field, and like Simon said, the places that have used it so far are states like Maine and Alaska, which are two of the more independent states in the country. And so what we do see is that there are more candidates running across the board. And so if you're running an election that is ranked choice voting, it's hard to say who would have won because there might have been a more diverse slate of candidates from the beginning, and then the coalition that comes out from that and the politics that come out from that are completely different. We're changing that incentive, and so if you make it so it's a little bit risky to be doing a character attack on somebody, that kind of changes the whole dynamic of the politics. And we see that in the data that comes out in places like Alaska and like Maine that do have ranked choice voting. The voters there do notice a perceivable reduction in the temperature of the politics,
So two related questions. Voting is largely a matter of culture and habit in terms of how you go about doing it. You're used to going to the same voting place, things like that. How long do you think it would take for Michigan voters to get used to the new way of voting should ranked choice voting be adopted?
So that's another really, really good question. One of the cool things about the policy, again, a consideration for the election administrators, is that it doesn't really roll out until 2030 is when it would be implemented statewide. And that gives an ample amount of time for education. The Secretary of State is both mandated by law and actually really good at educating voters on their options. Another provision of the policy makes sure that voters of our petition policy, make sure that voters are adequately informed about any changes in election law.
Do you have any big names that are behind this thing that you could put out on the front of this campaign to get some mojo?
I mean, we're talking to a lot of people across the state. We are starting to collect endorsements, but if you look back to Voters Not Politicians, most of their endorsements got released, in 2018 as they were approaching the election. For us, our focus is getting ink on paper in the field.
Setting aside big names for a minute, what about the people who are actually going to be administrating the system? When you talk to policymakers about ranked choice voting, one of the things that they say is a concern for them is how officials would administrate this. Do you have any county clerks who are on board?
Now you have less than 25 words. Go.
We're definitely talking to county clerks. We have clerks that are on board at the municipal level. Our conversations with county clerks are still ongoing, but we want to make sure that they're comfortable with the change. It's super important to us.
Thanks for doing our program. It's good to see you.
It's great seeing all of you. This is wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we appreciate that. See you for more Off the Record next week right here.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan public television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.